I'm going to do a bearing change on that SV650. Not because it needs it, but because it's been about 30,000 miles, I think. And I know it's got stock bearings in it. The bearing change on that bike is damn near identical to this bike. There are some small subtle differences, but the bearing change is going to be essentially the same. I don't have any indication that the bearings are shot, but at 30,000 miles it's probably about time, and I had just done a bearing change on my spare wheels, so it's fresh in my brain. I might as well do this. I'm going to get the axle off. Well, I'm going to get the pinch bolt off, loosen the axle, split this off, pull the two caliper bolts, pull the caliper out, hang it up, and drop the front wheel. This side, you'll see right here, this is the spacer, and then on the other side, this is going to be important for later. This is the side with the spacer. This is the non-speedo side. I'm going to refer to this as the non-speedo side. And on this side here, on the left side going forward, this is the speedo side. I've watched a couple of these videos, and I think some people skip a very important step or just don't elaborate on it enough. It's a really good way to destroy your brand new bearings. And as somebody who's done it twice, I wanted to make this video for that reason. So while you start working, make sure you pop your bearings into the freezer. I'm using an all balls kit. This comes with 2 dust seals that I'm damn near certain you don't end up using. So then to remove the axle, get something up there to prop the wheel up so it doesn't drop down. You can do this just as easily with a block of wood, but I paid for this pit bull thing. I'm going to use it. So 17 millimeter to loosen up the axle. We want to be very careful not to break the rotor inside of the speedometer. So I'm going to pull the axle all the way out there, and I can kind of roll this a little bit forward. Then you can get your top hat spacer thing out, and I can see there is no dust seal right here. That's important to me because the kit comes with some dust seals. Make sure your pinch bolt's loose. There's a spacer in here. I'm just going to leave it inside of here. And now I'm going to come over to this side. This is where you can very easily break this rotor. I'm going to roll it backwards a bit to get this speedo out. There it is. And then right in there, this thing, that's the rotor. I have broken this before. I didn't want to break it this time, so happy to see that I didn't. So I've got the wheel and tire assembly up on a couple blocks of wood, and we're ready to take the bearings out. But before I do that, I want to point something out. Now, this is a really shitty drawing, but this is the wheel here. This is one of the bearings. This is the speedo side, so this is the speedo side right here. This bearing is flush. This one is pushed all the way down. So that is this bearing here. There's a spacer in the middle. That's this red piece. And then on the other side, that bearing does not get pushed all the way to the shoulder on the other side. That spacer is this piece right here. If you see that, you can move it around. This one actually feels a little bit looser than I think it should be. But when we get to installation, one of the things you want to be able to do is by turning it, I'm going to turn it with my finger here. And then on this side, I should see that it spins. But I should also have that spacer loose enough that I can move it around. By being loose enough, we're going to be able to get a drift on it and smack it. That's not the main purpose of the spacer, but it's going to be the primary purpose for us to be able to get these bearings out. Reinstallation is going to be super important to do the speedo side first and then do the non-speedo side, because you need to get the shoulder, or you need to get the bearing on the speedo side pressed all the way to the shoulder, spacer in, and then we're going to put this one in all the way up to the spacer. But if you put it in too far, you'll destroy the bearing. Now, in my experience, you don't really need to use a torch, but I also never pass up an opportunity to use a torch. So what I'm going to do is heat up the outside here. That'll loosen the grip on the bearing by expanding the aluminum outwards. So once I heat that up, it should be a little bit easier to pull this bearing out. I'm just not going to hold it in one spot for too long. I'll probably just do this for like 30 seconds. So that should be nice and hot. Now I'm going to flip it, put it here, and what I use, I have actual bearing drifts and stuff. What I found works way better is this garage door spring tool. It's a garage door spring winding tool, and I find I get a lot better purchase with that thing than anything else. So by moving that spacer to the side, you can catch a little bit of the lip, and what it's going to do, it's going to hit that lip, which is going to drive on the inner race of the other side bearing, and you destroy the bearings on their way out. I think if you pull a bearing out this way, just assume that you've killed it. I'm just going to go back and forth, moving that spacer around and hitting it until I eventually get this bearing out. That came out quicker than I thought. That is a stock bearing right there. It's non-sealed on that side. There's a seal on that side. There's not a seal on that side. This is that spacer I was talking about. So now we can see that's that shoulder I was talking about. Speedo side is all nice and hot. I flip it over. Now we don't have a spacer to deal with. So this one will be even easier to get out. I'm just gonna work it around. That one came out. There's the other bearing. That's hotter than I thought. All right, so now we're ready to press some bearings in. I've gone through, cleaned this up with starter fluid both sides, so nice and clean areas on both. Before I actually put the bearings in, remember this is the Speedo side, I want to actually talk about the bearings. So one thing we don't want to do, and I am a person that's screwed this up before, which is why I actually wanted to talk about this. This is the inner race here. This is the outer race here. The only thing we want to be touching when we drive this in is the outer race. You hit that inner race, you start pushing it that way, that's what messes up the bearings. It will make it crunchy, it will destroy the bearing. So when we press a new bearing in, we only want to be touching the outside. You can do this with a whole bunch of different ways, but you can do it with a socket, you can do it with a bearing driver set like I'm going to use, but you do not want to be smacking on the inside. You want to be smacking the outside. These are my bearings, fresh out of the freezer. You see these look a little bit different. They are sealed on both sides, these all balls ones. I can tell these bearings were starting to probably get on their way out, but these ones will go in. Either way, it doesn't matter. All right, red and tacky is the grease I'm going to be using. I'm going to be greasing up, you know, the inside here. I'll show you. The Speedo drive, if you remember, that's that rotor part. It's not going to worry about having a little bit of grease out here. In fact, it might be happier for it. But you want to have these things greased up. I probably should heat this up a little bit more to expand it. It'll help me drive it in. This is the Speedo side. We want to drive in this one first. Now going back to this diagram, we want the Speedo side all the way in. If you did it the opposite way, because of how that rotor works, there's quite a bit of lift between the shoulder and where that spacer is going to put it. It puts it up almost like half a centimeter. I mean, that rotor's almost going to be halfway up of this thing. You want to put the Speedo side in first. Now I understand why Ari from Revzilla tells you to coat the outside of the bearing with grease as opposed to the inside of the wheel cavity. So you can heat up the inside, but whatever. This is going to work. So I've got a 39mm driver on here. And I need to get this lined up. Basically, I'm just going to go around and tap it a little tiny bit. I want to get it centered in it. So I'm probably going to move it around a bit. So I will know when I get to the bottom because there will be a change of tone. You will hear it. It goes higher pitched once you hit that shoulder. That's it. I'm going to give it one for good measure because, you know, you just never know, right? That's one bearing in. Alright, flip side. The much trickier side. Spacer is coming in. There. If it wasn't clear before, you can see how the spacer lifts over the shoulder. That's why we can't just drive this thing all the way home. This is the finesse side. So what I want to do is get this bearing to have this inner race contact that spacer enough that on the other side, when I spin it with my finger, it'll rotate both, but I don't want to destroy this bearing by pushing that inner race too far. I'm going to go back and forth and check this just several times to see how close I am. still like a quarter centimeter far. That's it. I can still move the spacer if I go any further. Yeah, if I go any further, I'm going to have an issue. But I can still move the spacer. I'm not sure if that's showing, but that's tighter than it was when I pulled them out. But I can still move that spacer around. And if I move it on this side, I'm moving it there. As far as I know, that's a bearing installation. So the way I had screwed this up before is just driving it all the way home and then destroying the bearing because it turns crunchy, because I thought you had to drive it all the way home. But you don't. So if you got the all balls kit like I did, it comes with a couple dust seals. Pretty damn sure you don't use these. In fact, I can't see any way. Well, obviously you can't use them on the Speedo side, and I don't see how you could use them on the other side with the top. All right, I guess I gotta put the wheel back on. And once you got it on there, got to get everything torqued back up, you got to get the calipers back on, and then you got to admire your handiwork and hope that you didn't fuck that up so that you don't die because your bearings exploded because you did it wrong, which could happen. But I take that risk every time I touch a motor vehicle. Every motor vehicle I touch could explode because I missed something really important. This could be one of those times, but I don't think so. You watched this far, thanks for watching.